I got into harvesting urban timber about 6 years ago. Property was going to be cleared for a new retirement community, and the old walnut grove, what was left of it, needed to be taken down. I basically didn't know anything, so I dug up as much as I could. I picked up old articles and excerpts from magazines. So it was kind of a trial and error process for me. There were not huge trees. The biggest ones were around 20 inches in diameter, so they weren't massive, but they were still too much for me to handle. I didn't know anything about cutting down trees. Luckily, I asked my local lumber yard if they knew anyone with a sawmill who could help me out, and they turned me on to a guy locally, and he turned me on to another guy who was interested in the walnut burls. And he came down and looked at the grove and decided that out of all the trees, there were only 6 or 8 good prospects that weren't rotted out. And he agreed that he would pay the backhoe guy and bring down some guys and saw down the trees, and he would take the root burls and I would get the lumber. So little did I know that the root burls were the valuable item on a walnut tree, and the lumber is kind of so-so. It just depends. The urban lumber for walnut could be good and it could be kind of iffy, and anyhow, the burl hunters are interested in the root burls for gun stocks and veneer and whatever else they might get out of it. So for those guys, it's worth the effort to pay to get the burls dug up, because they might get a good one. It might bring $10,000 or $15,000, but the risk they take is they might dig them all up and they might be worthless, rotted out, lumps of mush. So it's kind of a good deal if you can find someone who's willing to trade the labor and the effort to get the burls out, let them keep them, and you take the lumber, and everyone goes home happy. At least that was the case for my trees. One thing I didn't anticipate was the amount of effort involved in limbing the trees and getting rid of all the debris. That's a couple of trash containers full of stuff, and if you have to pay a tree service to come in and chip it, that's going to be a pretty dramatic expense. So I would warn anyone that before you cut down a tree, kind of evaluate what's going to be involved in getting rid of all the tree limbs and everything that make it practical, so you end up with a nice clean log, and you don't leave a big mess on the property of whoever let you take the tree down. Anyone who wants to get interested in urban timber, I would recommend the book by Sam Sherrill, Harvesting Urban Timber. It wasn't around when I started, but I've learned a lot from it, and it's definitely a great addition to anyone's library who's interested in woodworking and urban timber. And so that's how I got started. Today I'm going to try to mill at least 1 log, maybe 2. We'll see how it goes. I got these logs from a local tree service which has a yard, and what they do, instead of taking the trees that they cut down to the dump, they take them to a staging area, and if they can, they saw them into lumber, and otherwise they just store them. In the state of California, they passed a law which prohibits the amount of green waste that the municipalities can dump into the landfills. And what they want to do is encourage people to recycle lumber and shrubs and trees for mulch and whatever. And so that makes it difficult or expensive for the municipalities, when they have tree services cut down trees, to dump them in the landfill. In my case, I was able to go down there and talk to the manager of the lot, and he let me pick up some logs that were appropriate for the size of mill that I have. They have tons of logs that are way too big for my mill, and not a lot of small logs, so it's hit or miss whether I go down there and get something that's usable. But in this case, I got a couple of logs. I'm not really sure what kind of wood they are, so we'll cut it open and see exactly what it is. The mill I'm using is a homemade mill. I put it together for about $600 or $700. It was basically made with parts bought on eBay and scrap metal from the local steel yard, and there wasn't a lot of engineering into it. I copied what I could from existing bandsaw technology and sawmills that I've looked at over the years and read magazine articles about. You notice on this log is already cut on one face and on the bottom, and that was because it was a little bit too big to fit in my mill originally. So I used an attachment called the timber jig by Logasol, which is basically using a chainsaw on a guide to cut slabs. It's also good for making lumber. However, in the case of using these small logs, the chainsaw can sometimes take a lot of the wood away with the thickness of the kerf, which is the thickness of the blade. And a bandsaw is a much thinner kerf, and you end up recovering more lumber. So it's my preference on a small log to use timber jig if I have to do the initial slabbing and then do the lumber cutting with the bandsaw mill. Work. I need a cant hook.
A what?
One of those big bars.
Yeah.
Roll it over. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know where you want to go in terms of.
Well,
You want it